500 years before Europe learned to sculpt faces, our ancestors were creating perfect portraits. The Ife terracotta heads of Nigeria weren't just art, they were proof of sophistication that the world refuses to acknowledge. While Europe was still carving crude symbols into stone, the Yoruba people of Ile-Ife were mastering human anatomy with surgical precision. You're about to discover why these sculptures changed everything we thought we knew about African civilization, and why they've been hidden from our history books for centuries. In 1938, workmen digging a foundation in Wunmonije Compound, Ile-Ife, struck something extraordinary. 18 terracotta heads emerged from the red earth, faces so lifelike, so technically perfect, that European archaeologists couldn't believe Africans had created them. These weren't just sculptures. They were portraits. Individual faces with distinct features, expressions, and personalities captured in clay with a sophistication that wouldn't appear in European art for another 1,000 years. The dating shocked everyone. Carbon analysis placed these masterpieces between 500 and 800 AD. To put this in perspective, when our ancestors in Ife were creating photorealistic portraits, Europe was deep in the Dark Ages, producing crude religious icons that barely resembled human forms. The Ife artists understood human anatomy so perfectly they could render the subtle asymmetry that makes faces unique. They captured the weight of eyelids, the curve of lips, even the individual scorification patterns that told stories of identity and status. But here's what makes these sculptures revolutionary: they weren't copying Greek or Roman styles like European Renaissance artists would do centuries later. This was purely African innovation. The Ife artists developed their own techniques for mixing clay with quartz sand to prevent cracking. They mastered the delicate balance of firing temperatures that preserved fine details. They understood light and shadow in ways that created depth and emotion. This wasn't primitive art, this was technical mastery that surpassed anything being created anywhere else on Earth. The most famous piece, the Copper Mask of Obalufon, represents artistic achievement that wouldn't be matched in Europe until Donatello's work in the 1400s. 900 years later. Think about that. While African artists were creating bronze and terracotta portraits with mathematical precision, European sculptors were still struggling with basic proportions. The Ife mask shows understanding of the golden ratio, perfect facial symmetry, and metallurgical techniques that required generations of knowledge to master. Yet when German archaeologist Leo Frobenius first saw these works, he declared they must be from Atlantis, anything but African. When the British Museum acquired Ife pieces, they were quietly stored away, too perfect to fit the narrative of primitive African art. Academic papers described them as anomalies or foreign influences rather than acknowledge what was obvious: Africa had created the world's first true portrait tradition. The artisans of Ife weren't just sculptors, they were cultural historians. Each head tells a story. The vertical scorification lines indicate royal lineage. The holes around the hairlines suggest these sculptures originally wore real hair, crowns, or beards. They were likely displayed in shrines, representing ancestors or deified kings with such accuracy that families could recognize their features generations later. This wasn't abstract spiritual art, this was documentary portraiture. What's most remarkable is the artistic philosophy behind these works. Unlike Egyptian art which stylized the human form according to rigid conventions, or Greek art which idealized beauty into mathematical perfection, Ife artists celebrated individual uniqueness. They captured personality, age, emotion, the humanity that makes each face distinctive. This approach to portraiture was so advanced it wouldn't emerge in European art until the late Renaissance. The technical innovation extends beyond artistry. Ife sculptors developed lost wax casting techniques independently, creating bronze works of stunning complexity. They understood that different metals required different temperatures and handling. They created their own tools, furnaces, and artistic traditions without any external influence. This wasn't borrowed technology, this was pure African genius. Today, these masterpieces sit in museums worldwide, often without proper context about their revolutionary nature. The British Museum, Metropolitan Museum, and Louvre display Ife works alongside much later European pieces, rarely acknowledging that these African artists were centuries ahead of their time. The narrative remains that great art began in Greece and Rome, reached its peak in Renaissance Europe, and everything else is ethnic or primitive. But you know the truth now. You understand that while the world was struggling with basic human representation, your ancestors were mastering it. When Europe was carving crude religious symbols, Africa was creating individuals. When the Renaissance discovered human anatomy, African artists had been perfecting it for a millennium. The Ife terracotta heads aren't just ancient art, they are proof that African creativity shaped the foundation of human artistic expression. Every time someone creates a portrait, captures a face, or celebrates individual beauty in clay or bronze, they are walking a path your ancestors carved 5 centuries before Christ. Follow Ponolens, because your history is far more magnificent than they ever told you.